Alright, so by now there's been plenty of early access videos released in regards to Welt, as well as the post-launch of version 4.2, where numerous players have uploaded their own experience playing Welt. He has been substantially improved, however, there's definitely going to be a big inconsistency with Welt. In other words, the Pseudo sustained Welt is back, but not for everyone. There will be a noticeable difference between if you have, say, an E0 Welt versus an E2 Welt versus an E4 Welt. And it's also going to depend on the characters that you tend to pair Welt with. Based on my limited experience playing a sub E2 Welt, I would say the Pseudo sustaining option is back, but it's not going to be around for very long. I used Welt as a Pseudo sustain for Acheron on side 1 of Memory Chaos 12, and while I was still able to clear it, there were multiple characters that were already in the critical HP range. The problem with this is that as time goes by, these enemies are going to hit harder and harder, which means his Pseudo sustaining functionality is going to end up not being a thing again. One thing that I will say in regards to Welt is that if you are going to use him as a Pseudo sustain, it is extremely important that he is on element. So if you take him to a fight to where the enemy doesn't have natural imaginary weakness, like say Negador for example, he is going to be highly reliant on having Silverwolf or Constance paired with him for that imaginary implant. For Negador specifically, the delay that Welt might be able to impose is actually counterproductive, because we want Negador to take action so that way he can summon the lances, so that way we can take out the lances, because I think each lance does like 15% max of Negador's health. When I was running a here's my Rappa at home build on Welt, while I only took 2 hits in the entirety of the fight, it ended up taking me 7 cycles, and a lot of that just came down to the fact that I completely skipped phase 1 of the mechs for Negador. So again, counterproductive. Sometimes you do want the enemies to take their turn. Same thing with Flame Reaver. You want Flame Reaver to take the turn, so that way the clones get spawned, so that way you can reduce the amount of damage reduction buff that Flame Reaver has. And then there's also that 8 elite from Pentaconi that throws the Soul Glade bottles at your team, and if your team has a shield, then he'll take like reflect damage onto himself. That's another elite that you wouldn't want to delay per se. And then there's also the dogs that it summons, which you take those out, they apply a bleed dot onto the elite, so the elite dies quicker. Context of pure fiction, I didn't do any testing. I think Welt and Jiao Shou are going to have a lot of anti-synergy with each other. I'm not for sure if Welt would be an okay standalone unit to use with Acheron and pure fiction. I didn't test it out. However, Jiao Shou wants enemies to take their turns fairly normally. Welt is going to be counterproductive, and he's going to cause that delay. So this is something that's probably not going to work out too well, and you're going to have to really just pick one or the other. Do you want the delay on the enemies, or do you want Jiao Shou to have the same stack generation? But then again, maybe somebody's not even thinking about running Welt in terms of pure fiction, so there's also that. One thing with Welt, I'm sure a lot of players already know, but I'll go ahead and repeat it here. There can be inconsistency with his breaking since his skill is a bound. Because of this, I had to do numerous resets. Now, his RNG was lessened when I was running the We Have Rappa at Home build, because I had Ron May there, which increased his weakness break efficiency. But when I was just doing a standard Pseudo sustain with Acheron, I did have to do a lot of resets because the skill bounce just was not working in my favor, and I wouldn't get the breaks like I needed to. He's definitely going to be a little bit more on the inconsistent side. Ideally, on paper, the whole point of the Pseudo sustained Welt, at least in regards to Acheron, is so that way you can use another standard Nihility character and then slot in that 4th slot, maybe somebody like say a Tribi or an Ashvel, for example, to help with your stack generation. And while this can work, I don't think Welt as an individual is inherently going to give you the same type of stack generation as a standard preservation character who is running Trend of the Universal Market. So you're pretty much trading off one for the other. You're getting lower stack generation, but you can also slide in somebody else into that 4th slot. And this is assuming that you can actually clear the fight somewhat comfortably. I think for a good number of players out there, not everybody, but Pseudo sustained Welt just is not going to be a viable option. I highly doubt a lot of the player base is going to be able to take Welt into Anomaly Arbitrician King and be able to use him as a Pseudo sustain with Acheron. I highly doubt it. There's probably going to be somebody out there who can do it, but I'm not going to be one of those players. Of course, for Memory Chaos, Apoc Shadow could definitely still be a thing, although I'm not for sure if this is going to be viable in the new updated difficulty tier that we're going to get for each of the 3 in-game modes, Pure Fiction, Memory Chaos, and Apoc. There was a dev radio talking about this, so I'm questioning how his Pseudo sustaining ability going to be in that kind of environment. The dev later was very vague. It did say that it was going to be slightly more difficult than the current highest floors that we have, but slightly harder doesn't really give us full context, so I'll have to wait and see on that. Overall, I've had a lot of of fun with Welt. I ran him on 4-piece win set a little bit when I was running him with Acheron, and then I was running him on just Sam's gear when I was doing the whole Rappa at home build. When I was trying to use him as a DPS, I was using Acheron's gear on him like 1-to-1, and it just wasn't very good. Keep in mind, I had a horrendous build on him. If I had an imaginary orb, sure, it probably would have been better. DPS wise, I'm not too impressed with them, but then again, that's just my own personal experience with them. I'm sure there's plenty of people who have Welt at E0 or E1, and they've been able to make him a very viable DPS. Overall, Pseudo sustaining functionality is potentially there, but I'm more skeptical on the DPS side of things. That's all my thoughts that I have for Welt. If you had taken out the time to watch this or listen to this, just want to say thank you for your time. You be safe out there. Deuces.